have Richard Flyer at 2 Litchfield Road.
A little smaller building to discuss tonight than those, but very visible in the town and very important.
Mr. Flyer, if you could just introduce yourself.
Cross-section. Yeah, pardon my voice, I've been losing it. There we go. My name is Richard Flyer, and I live at 43 Adams Road. Anyway, I wasn't sure how we should be prepared tonight for this, but your group noticed that, your organization noticed that there was a for sale sign, and you saw, and if you saw that, then you saw the for lease sign. And we just haven't totally decided what to do. Either way, there is a covenant, I guess that's what it's called, in the deed that makes it impossible, and I'll explain that after I say that, it makes it impossible to sell the building or lease the building to a credible tenant. And there's no way around it. It has easements on the outside, and on the inside it has, I guess, some controls over existing historical items that are in the building. I guess everything from the floor to fireplaces to I don't know what else. There's a few other things that are kind of interesting. But half the building is probably 20 years, all renovated inside. Every historical thing is removed from those rooms. It's the first, I think the first or second part of the building that was built. I think the second. It was built in 2 stages in the late 1700s, as we understand it, in the early 1800s. So in one section, it has floors that are those bouncing floors that are made of some kind of plasticky material. That's that whole dining room area. I'm not sure what, I've never quite seen them before. I've heard about them, but that's one floor. And then there's a kitchen-like area, but it's not really a kitchen because it doesn't have a stove and a few other things in it. But it's, I think it's 100% non-historical in any way or fashion. The walls are not insulated, and the storm windows are not historical. I don't know when they were put on, but they weren't. They don't meet any historic standard. The roof was put on after that agreement was signed, and I don't know if you saw and went over and looked at that roof, but it doesn't meet any historical standard in the slightest. And that's the whole brown roof on the thing that was built there. Maybe about 7 years ago it was put on. So it's kind of a challenge in terms of if we were to put someone in to live there, we're going to have to do some reasonable work in the kitchen to make it a real kitchen. It's got a tile floor, plastic tile, rubber tile floor, I'm not sure, and some cabinets. But if any of you have been in there for the Democratic meetings or various events, you've seen it. I assume there's at least one Democrat in front of me, but I'm not sure. That leaves us with a problem in terms of getting it leased because many people are interested in living in a building that has, normal comfort. Probably, I don't know if it was 4 years ago or 5 years ago, maybe 4, we went through the process of getting and I think we came before this group, and I think we went before the the council. And we wanted to get it changed, use it for housing, and they voted to let us. And we're trying to find the document now, but that went through. But at that time, and I think it was an amendment to the agreement, or I'm not sure how it was done. But at that time, the Democratic Party came in and sort of was an unusual use in terms of the occupation of the building for, I don't know, 5 years, 5.5 years. They recently ran out of funding. And so we're letting them use it at the moment, but there's no rent coming in. So we're heating it, and we're paying the taxes and all the other costs, mortgage. But it's kind of a problem. And if we rent it out to a residential user, the value doesn't cover the expenses by any means of this property. Now, we are all both sides, both groups, care about this building. We've been involved in historic preservation for my whole career, about 50 years. And in what we've done, it's really we're very proud of it. And I know you are all. And this is one of our only sort of historic buildings. I don't know if it's on any register, federal or state, but I know, having renovated these, that in order to deal with the work that needs to be done, this would not qualify for getting probably a lot of funding or any funding on a historical basis, based on its condition now of half the building inside on the ground floor and the upper floor being basically anything that was there was removed by the whoever did it years ago. The bathrooms are all modern bathrooms, or sort of modern. But it has still a lot of charm in it. The one floor, you wouldn't want to be drinking wine or beer or anything because it really slants. You couldn't play marbles in there. But it's the prettiest thing around that area, I think, arguably. And it speaks a lot for sort of hoping we can, bring back some of the town and keep it that way. But I need help. We're both kind of responsible for the building. And what we've had is a number of commercial tenants. We've had 2 law firms. We've had a school. We've had a management company, all in Londonderry, management company, and a lawyer's group. And they read that agreement, and they said, there's no way I would buy it. And because we can't use it. It has to be, the walls have to be really redone. I suppose you could take the time and build over them so that someday in the future, everything, the plaster and in those rooms would be saved. We've done that before. But these companies that would pay the rent, that would cover the operations of the building and pay to fix some of the other things. It needs a new heating system, for example. The piping, for example, are so old that we've been gradually replacing them when they break. And they've broken several times in different areas, causing huge damage. it would have almost made sense to board up the building and just put it on mothballs. We tried to lighten up the barn with the art group in town, but that's looking old. Our other choice would have been just plywood, and to board up the building because it's non-economical is not something we've ever done in 50 years. I don't even know how to deal with the situation, but we're not proud of the way it looks now. We just almost finished for the second time painting it. What the problem is with that is underneath those clapboards, it's all wet, and there's a ton of rot here and there. And when we've could find it or deal with it, we've done that. It wasn't taken care of before we took it over, and as you see, the roof doesn't comply with historic standards. The barn does, and there are groups in the state that are nonprofit groups that we found one in Portsmouth that has some interest in from her organization in putting in some money, a few $100,000, but it will take a lot more to get the barn going. The barn is gone. All of the wood and the siding and everything is absolutely rotted and gone, and needs to be replaced. And the roof is maybe the third or fourth time they've been laying a roof on top of a roof, and you can't do that too many times. It's very thick, but it still leaks, and so it needs to all be removed, and the beams inside basically reset and built, and a concrete floor needs to be put into it. But it's an important barn in terms of its history. So we've gotten that far. But in terms of putting in the kind of things that a law firm would need, or a dentist's office would need, the problem is that they need really good air conditioning and really good HVAC system. That's nothing like what exists in the building. So we have that issue. So what we're hoping, I mean, I'd be happy to be involved. We'd be happy to keep it. But we really need a real partner in it. And that means a partnership with you guys, your group, in that I would think that if everybody's concerned about it, that we could get advice. And some of you know a lot about what you're doing in that area. And maybe together we could apply for some of this nonprofit money. It would help if you were to be involved. And just the barn alone would go a long way with your involvement. I keep waiting for was that cupola, or the thing on the top of the building? It's leaning more and more backward. And we've been looking for other ones that might be more proportionate to the building. That wasn't original. So we have that issue. If we were to sell it, I don't know anybody else that has a property in town that they can't sell, but we've had at least 7 or 8 commercial groups that have turned it down because of that agreement. They can't do anything, absolutely nothing. It's all at the mercy and whim of this organization. And our thinking is that if we could keep the spirit of the agreement, how it was written, in terms of preserving the building, and have an expert really look it over that has certain ability to keep the property safe and going in the right direction, but make it viable, then I think it would be great for anybody owning the building. There are a number of things in terms of the exterior. I remember several years ago when I wanted to put a bank there, and we went quite far with the town, and it was finally shot down. It was a small bank. They were going to pay for the restoration of, if you remember, pay for the restoration of the property, the house. They were going to use the house, but they were going to pay to restore it and the barn. And that's the way most of these kinds of structures that are commercial and historical, many of them are done that way, where there's an allowance in many cities and towns to make a relationship where if the property is kept and restored, that something else can be put near it. But in this case, it was turned down because it went above, it was next to the house in the back where it couldn't be really seen very well from any street, maybe from Litchfield, somewhat, but way in the back. And it was fairly small. I think at the end of the day, we were looking for 3,000 or 4,000 feet, but that bank would have paid for everything. And now we're struck with the building where if it doesn't have significant love from ownership and pride, it's going to continue to deteriorate underneath. It'll be being painted every 2 years or 3 years with the way the water gets to the outside. The area around the building, it's a stone foundation, but the entire area, I don't know when it was done, but when it was landscaped, it's sometime years and years ago, all the fill and area on every side of the building was somehow allowed to lean towards the building instead of draining away. And it's a really big job to have the basement redone all around it. And therefore, they had an original, I don't know how many years ago that was done, but maybe it's historical. There's a drain in the basement floor, and there's a couple of them. And one is in the one corner where eventually they put in a sump pump. But when it rains, it just comes through the stone walls underneath, the rocks. And so, again, if it's the only or one of the only historic buildings in our town, I would think that, it's hard to expect anyone or any owner to restore it unless they had an unlimited budget. And so if that continues and somebody keeps painting it, then I don't think the building is going to hold up any better than the barn did in the next 20 years. I think that you'd be dealing with a real mess. It is now, but you'd be dealing with a real mess in terms of getting it back into any shape. So if we were to look at that agreement, maybe there are things that would allow a better process. If somebody were trying to get things done there, they wouldn't be held up for weeks and months by something worked out so that it was an expedited kind of thing. That's how normally buildings are renovated and handled. And in this case, there are just so many things. You'd have a crew there, and then I know what it's like to have a crew leave and come back. You know, a month later, that happened over on Pillsbury Road, where we renovated that farmhouse next to the church, in the middle of the churches, on Pillsbury Road, and that was very difficult. So, if you have ideas, I mean, we have one floor in there that probably should be replaced, and that's the big dining room area, because it bounces when you walk on it, and it doesn't look very good. I don't know when that was done, but I believe it was done a couple of years before we ended up with having the building. So I and my partners are kind of beside ourselves in terms of they just want to sell it. And I never walked away from one of these before, but I have to think about what they're saying. And if we do, then the problem is the only people that can use it can't pay very much rent, because they have the standards they would have if it was a accounting firm or a law firm. They'd have to put up with the bare bones kind of facility inside that that they could, and that would be the only thing they could afford. And what that leaves you are tenants that normally don't have a good chance of lasting. They come and go, just like many of the people that rent these kinds of homes are people that not only can't buy, but they can't really lease the more expensive homes in town. And so we have that issue. We've been trying. We've replaced a lot of things. We were forced to. I normally take out pools if they're there anyway, because they're not safe. But we could not get an insurance company to insure the building, the property, with that pool there. We have that in writing, along with a lot of other things dealing with the building. So, and if anything really happened there that was a difficulty that the insurance company is constantly worried about, the liability issue is there for everyone as well involved. So my thinking is that we have to think about that. And I listened to you before talking about these beautiful buildings that came before this. They're just both beautiful. I love the New Balance building. It's absolutely great. But as much thought needs to go into saving this building for the town, and not expect it to be magic and think that somebody's going to not be able to lift a finger, really. And I was criticized and for taking out the pool by a member of the town. And the town, that's where the building department put their foot down and allowed us to do it, because it wasn't safe and it wasn't protected and it was a mess. It wasn't in good condition. So if we're going to have those kinds of battles on every little thing, then we need more participation from the people that are responsible for preserving that property. So those are all my thoughts. I can answer any questions you'll have.
Go ahead, John.
I think I've talked, Richard, a little bit about our walkthrough, and for the benefit of the commission, Jim Butler and I did the walkthrough on this property, and I think, and Jim, jump in if you disagree, but the picture that Richard painted of the barn and of the house is what we saw on our walkthrough, okay? The barn is, I'm not a structural engineer, I don't know if the barn is a recoverable item or not, but it certainly is dilapidated and despite, I think, some attempts to close out the colony of bats, I think, with the artistic boarding up of the window and
It worked.
all that kind of stuff. You know, the barn is difficult at best. The house had everything that he described and more. I wouldn't even describe that as a kitchen. It was more like a commercial break room because it, you know, had kind of a big area, but no appliances of note. And the floors certainly felt like walking uphill at points in the building. So it's been well maintained, it's been painted. There's been some exterior work done, exterior painting. There's been some cleanup in that entry area that was done. So, you know, one of the questions I think we were looking to answer on the inspection was, did Mr. Flyer and maybe the previous owners meet the standard of substantially maintaining the buildings in their current or better condition? And I would answer that question, yes. I don't, you know, with an understanding that when Mr. Flyer, the owner before him, and the owner before him, because the easement goes back 3 owners, okay? When these folks were in that building, I think everyone has made an attempt within the possibilities of doing things financially of maintaining the building, but the building was in bad shape to start with. So basically, you're ending up, what's the expression? Putting is it a silk tie on a peg or something? I mean, that's basically what we end up doing with this building, trying to maintain it as it is. So, so it's dilapidated. There's been some. It was clear. We also met with Mr. Flyer's real estate agent, and it was clear that she hasn't had any interest, and whether there's something in the easement that can be discussed will be a matter we'll kick over to the town manager, I think. But
Well, she's had a lot of interest, but as soon as they see that one document, they have all walked away. We've kept it.
And that's fine, and I think the commission has to think a little bit about what's our interest here, okay? Is our interest ultimately in preservation of the house and perhaps of the barn? And if that's our interest, is our best route forward to ask perhaps the town manager to talk about the easement and what can be worked out with regards to modifications to the easement to make the property saleable, or what can be worked out with the easement to put Mr. Flyer in a better opportunity to restore the property, maybe through commercial development. So I think that's where we ended up. Jim, I don't...
Yeah, I'll chime in here. I had the opportunity to walk around the barn, went inside the barn. I wouldn't suggest anyone go inside the barn because it's a little bit hazardous. The sills are pretty much rotted. Any of the stone foundation is starting to kick out. The roof is a real question. The bones itself, the timbers and the structures may be okay. They look okay. I'm not an engineer. But I think Richard pretty much painted a pretty accurate picture of the barn. And I think we're in agreement with that. Now, with regards to the house, once again, we walked around the house, went inside, outside the house. I had the opportunity to visit that office or house or whatever you want to call it at the time with the previous owner. There are wide wood floored planks throughout the house. Yes. Is there some historical value to it? Yes, there is. Are there some panels on the walls that have some historical factor? I would say probably. But there is a problem. There's a major problem here And I can understand that it's gonna be very difficult to sell this house, because it's a quagmire. If you go to sell that house, or someone tries to rehab that house, they have to think of ADA. Those bathrooms certainly don't meet ADA requirements. The stairs that go from the first floor to the second floor, I'm sure they don't meet code. I mean, I've been in the business long enough that I can make a quick assessment, and, you know, I'm not always right, but I think I'm pretty damn close to on this one. For someone to go and buy that under these pretenses, to try to remodel it, the wiring is all gonna have to be changed. They're gonna have to either go through the walls. I mean, there's just isn't adequate wiring for a law firm, for an office, or a dentist. There's just gonna be tremendous amount of money to put in just to try to bring it up to snuff. I don't know what the historical value is. I don't know if this is on the historical register or not. It's been in town for quite a long time, and I understand that. But it's my opinion. The one thing that I did like about it, and unfortunately they have been enclosed, I don't think they have been damaged, but enclosed so people couldn't get into it, is there are a couple of nice fireplaces in there that show the date of the house. You know, there are floors, you're right, there's vinyl floors there, the old wooden floors there, there's ceramic tile floors there. It really is a problem. And what I would suggest that we do, and it's only a suggestion, is that we ask the town council to instruct the town manager to see whether or not the easements on the houses, I'm not gonna say lifted because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not involved in that, but if we can somehow either massage it or change it so it becomes a little bit more appeasing to someone to buy it. But right now, I'll be honest with you, if I had all the money in the world, I wouldn't touch it, because you really, you know what it is? It's like dropping the money in a hole. It's unfortunate. For instance, the windows. The windows, I don't know when the windows were changed, but I would say they probably have been changed within the last 15 years. They're either vinyl or aluminum windows, so they don't meet any historical perspective. I think Richard did a good job taking out the fencing and taking out the pool and opening that up, because it did open up that house on the lot. But I really think we're caught between, all of us are caught between a rock and a hard place. And somehow we have to determine, or at least see whether or not we can change some of these easement to make it more pliable, to either get someone in there that has the money that wants to rehab it, which will cost a ton of money. I mean, the plumbing, I don't even know, there could be, are there any cast iron pipes in there? There could be
think so.
asbestos in there I don't know. But I mean, that's how old the building is. You know, the cellar leaks like a sieve.
You even have lead blowing, you know, it's,
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know how much more you can do to that building. I don't know how much I would want to continue to invest in that building to keep it up, because it's a money pit. It really is a money pit.
We've put in about $80,000
Have you?
of
Yeah.
repairs in the property since we've owned it. So the small rent that we've gotten has been pretty much used up for just trying to keep the building going.
I think our best bet at the time, and it was hotly discussed, was the bank, because the banks had, well, at the time, they had deep pockets, and they could get certain tax credits, and it was, if I remember correctly, it was a small Savings Bank, I think it was.
Yeah, Merrimack.
And, you know,
Yeah, credit
that's
union or
something
something like
maybe a
that.
bank at the time could have been drawn in and they did some renderings, if I remember correctly, but that got shot down.
Yeah, I have it. I have the renderings if anybody wants to see it.
I just feel as though that house and that barn's gonna stay the way it is till either it falls down or it burns to the ground, one or the other. I mean, I just don't.
You know, if you look at the liability, I'm barely squeaking by with the insurance company. And I have the documents here that show when they were not threatened, they took our insurance away, and we had to approve that the pool was out and a few other little things before they would reinstate the insurance. So that was scary, because I don't know what kind of liability we would have or everybody would have if you're dealing with something that's controlled to the degree that you can't move financially with something. Then what do you do? And yet, you know, we've tried to deal with some of the hazards, but I worry about the barn because, you know, when you drive by it, you can see that the barn doors are, a lot of parts are missing, and other matters with it, and it's missing the whole bottom, so you could just almost crawl right in. So,
Yeah, because this actually goes back to 2006, when the town councils, at really what was recommended in the master plan at the time, one of the four major recommendations they made, the town council put together a historic properties preservation task force. And that was looking at all the properties. There's some basic criteria that the task force had laid down of, you know, for what to be considered historic in the town's terms, was something greater than 100 years, something that had at least external authenticity that was at 75%. I think it had to be also, if it was historically significant, whether from a historic event or from the particular type of architecture, and developed a list. I think what we had is 137 properties. Well, actually, there's 139. Two of the owners declined to be a part of it. But the task force did quite a bit of work in working with people who had historic houses and even properties. And those individuals certainly had a love of something historic, and they put a lot of their lives into it, more than, you know, what a normal person would do to maintain a house. And I think this occurred probably not too long after that. But of that list, the town had these properties it would like to at least maintain, but it didn't have the wherewithal to actually go purchase them and maintain them and do anything. So what the task force realized was the best way to use a historic property was, you know, have it being used either as a residence, and most of the resident, you know, the historic properties were residents at the time, or being a office, you know, very, very light commercial activity. And I know the DeCarlos were interested in selling the property, but had great difficulty, because I think a lot of the location, they had a couple of young kids, and they were very concerned about the kids because of all the traffic that is around there. So they had come to the planning board, and the planning board, I think, had looked at the time into, you know, light use, and I think we had put together a potential ordinance which didn't, you know, fly, because of people at the public hearing didn't think we should be creating businesses out of you know, old property, and especially some of them were along Mammoth Road. One property was developed that's just north of the CVS, and I can't think of the name of it now, but
oh yeah, my lawyers, my
I was just gonna say, Roby.
Roby House?
yes, the Roby House. And the Roby House was, we didn't know at first what was going to happen to it, but a gentleman from Derry who had, you know, a computer business, software business, bought the property and has made modifications to it, which allowed, his business to utilize it.
They did a good job, and then he
Yes.
went bankrupt.
And that was something the town really wanted. The other was what's the Coach Stop now. It was back the old days of the Homestead Restaurant. There was a series of restaurants before that. But the Historical Society, this is back in the 80s, had gone out to actually picket the place, so the developer wouldn't, in fact, I think it was he'd filed a demolition permit. But then the economy took a turn south, and it just was unused for a while until, I think it was the McDonough's was interested in it, and using it as a restaurant, which it had been for many years. But really, in regards to this property, we couldn't put it into a historic property, but the town council at the time did do it. It was basically spot zoning against the planning board's protests. The planning board kind of worked with the DeCarlos and then the potential owner, and that's what this agreement here was between the town council at that time and the town manager at that time. Because the purchaser of the property, which was the Londonderry Times, really loved the house and wanted to maintain it as a historic property. So the town had reached an agreement with the DeCarlos, and that's what we have tonight. So that was done at that period of time. But the basic tenets of what the Historic Properties Preservation Task Force were looking for is at least a good preservation of the external appearance. It didn't always have to be the same materials, and a lot of those materials, are not available today, or some probably at considerable cost. But I think we have to look at the cost of it, because certainly I think we all love that building. It's part of the town. It's in a very visible location, and to utilize it as what the planning board visualized was, and the Preservation Property Task Force visualized was as a light office use, whether a lawyer's office, doctor's office, dentist's office, insurance agent, or even the possibility of a bank. But a lot of banks now like drive-through windows. We went through that with the property. It just was not really very viable, and from a planning perspective, it probably would have been a horrendous situation there.
Actually, we worked out a good plan for that with the building department and the other department with John, who runs it now.
Engineering.
John Trotter.
He came out there, and we worked out a great plan for exiting onto the very back end in only one direction on whatever that.
Litchfield Road?
Yeah.
Onto Litchfield.
So, but there comes a point with a building where, and it's probably the old stuff that's still remaining, but a lot of the other things that happen in between, like the plumbing over the years and some of the electrical, everything starts going. And in this case, everything is going. The building was not given to us. We didn't take it over in good condition. It was trashed. And it cost thousands and thousands of dollars to deal with what we were left with. I don't know if you're aware of that. But it was not in good condition, and it hadn't been taken care of. It was very minimal.
I hadn't seen it personally, but I've heard from individuals.
We have pictures of it. You wouldn't believe it.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just offer kind of our involvement and where we see this process going from here. Sure. We've had discussions with Mr. Flyer. I've had discussions with Mr. Flyer probably 4 or 5 times going back several months. The assistant town manager and I have spoken with him and met with him, and I just want to, if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, sort of orient the board to what we see as the issues and the potential path forward. So, Mr. Flyer is here because we encourage that this should be the first stop, because I agree with Councilor Butler that to the extent there is going to be any kind of modification to this historic preservation easement, that is a town council decision. However, it would be my expectation that the town council would want to know, what does the Heritage Commission think about this? And so I think it's important that this meeting is taking place tonight. In terms of the easement itself, it has many of the features that have been alluded to tonight, but I think it's important to go over some of them. It has that obligation that you referred to, Mr. Mann, regarding maintaining the condition of the property, at least in its current state. And that obligation is on the owner. And that obligation, it persists out into perpetuity. It has restrictions on pretty much anything that is going to be done to the property, inside or outside, to include the placement of structures, the growing of trees, shrubs, et cetera, on the exterior, needs to come back either to the town, to the Heritage Commission, to the Planning Board, or perhaps to both. I do want to pause to note what I think we all recognize, which is that as you noted, Mr. Rugg, a lot of times you see these historic preservation efforts focused on the exterior of the building, but in this instance, there is a requirement that changes to the interior. Most changes to the interior require sign-off from this body, the Planning Board, or both. You have to remember as well that this, at the time of the rezoning, was placed into the historic district in town, which creates additional requirements for sign-off. So you have the requirements in the historic preservation easement that this board sign off on certain things. You have a separate requirement under the zoning ordinance and under the historic district provisions of that ordinance requiring sign-off. And I think that is perhaps a factor in what is scaring off potential users. You have some provisions in here that talk about, or that anticipate the possibility of what's happening now, and that is that conditions may change. And what paragraph 10 of this instrument states is, grantor and grantee acknowledge the possibility that circumstances may arise in the future to render the purpose of this easement impossible to accomplish. In addition, both parties recognize that the possibility of condemnation and casualty always exists. In the event such circumstances do in fact arise, the parties agree that those provisions of this easement, which are rendered impossible by performance by such circumstances, condemnation, or casualty, may be extinguished by judicial proceedings in a court of competent jurisdiction. And so I believe that to the extent there is going to be a modification, first of all, I think it can be modified. I think it may require approval of a court to do that. But as I said, I think that what's important is what I think we all recognize, which is that you can't have historic preservation in this case without commercial viability. And I do think that based on some of the fairly one-sided language that exists in this historic preservation easement, we don't have commercial viability right now. And so I echo everybody's comments. I think that this is something that should be explored because on the path that we're headed, I don't think we're achieving that purpose, that mutual purpose that we set out on in 2006.
Mr. Butler, you had made a recommendation
Yes.
that we direct the town manager to review the easement and do as you've suggested, bring it up to the town council and/or our attorney and talk about what would be necessary to change the easement to make it commercially viable. I think that's a good idea. I don't think we have many other options in this case.
Well, I also want to bring up the fact that at one point, the Max Homestead, we looked at the Max Homestead, and we spent money, correct me if I'm wrong, Art, to have someone go in and evaluate that house.
Yes.
And that house is in a lot better condition than this, and we stayed away from it, because we all know it was going to cost a lot of money, taxpayers' money. And I didn't want to throw bad money, good money after bad. And so that house definitely was in better condition, and we didn't get a good
Yeah,
report
yeah,
on it.
Max was, I thought, fairly decent, not perfect, but,
And it was a livable house.
yes, yeah.
I mean, the Mac family lived in it.
You could all say that, well, perhaps I didn't do my due diligence, but I didn't, that was, buying the house was a byproduct of getting involved there. So I ended up with a house without wanting it. And that's all I can say about that. But I just wanted you to know we went into it with our eyes open, but for a different reason.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, from, my recollection is that it seemed like the agreement worked first, this is what the parties wanted. But longer term, it has not been, worked to the desire that we would like, because we'd love to see that building, stay there. We'd like to see it maintained, we'd like to see it restored. We don't have the wherewithal to do it, but having it used by either individual or a company, small company, would be perfect. And that, I think, one of the major things the Historic Preservation Task Force realized was the best thing is to keep these properties in use, whether it's a house or whether it's an office, and to work with these people from what we, what we could. We just didn't have the money to do it. And I know as far as preservation, it comes to the external appearance. We had no jurisdiction on the interior at all. And most of those old houses probably had 1960 style kitchens because they'd been renovated. And a lot of, I know with the Morrison house, when that was torn apart, they found out, I think there was 3 additions put onto it since it was built in, it had to be early 1700s, right, 1720, 1722, about that vintage, or 1724. That's a number that sticks in my brain for it. But
I think that Mr. Fly's intent is honorable. I don't know how many people realize that when Mr. Fly came to live in Londonderry, he bought that small little house across the street from the town common. And at the time, the front porch was falling off. We had blue top hanging over the roof, and it was a disgrace. It was an eyesore. It was a disgrace, and that's hollow ground, in my opinion. I mean, it was right next to the town common. And to Richard's credit, he spent some money because the bones were good. I think you got the high school kids involved in it. And if you look at it today, it looks pretty damn good.
yeah, remember one old home day, we had,
Yeah.
there were paintings in the windows. The windows were taken out, so
Right.
they had boarded up. and
that
there
was
were
my
paintings
first
done by
window
people in
tour.
town.
I
It was
truly,
fun.
I personally believe that if Mr. Fly had thought that there was a way in which he could restore it, I believe he would. It's my opinion.
Have you all seen it inside at one time or another?
I haven't seen the inside.
No, I haven't either. I've heard from several individuals what it looks like, and it's not, probably the best way to put it, needs a lot of work.
Yeah, but it's not, from a point of view, there's a Ukrainian family, for example, that calls us their representative's been calling us, two engineers, a grandmother and a mother, and then a couple of children. And our government's bringing them over here, and that's where they wanted to come to Londonderry. And they like that house. Looked fine for them. But in terms of putting them in there and with things breaking continually, I just feel for them though. They want to be in Londonderry in the school system. That's what they've been very adamant. But what's happening is underneath underneath the clapboards, it's all wet and rotting.
Yeah, that's probably the major concern is it's just really rotting away. It's just sitting there rotting away. If we do nothing, it'll probably collapse, we won't have it anymore. but how to maintain it. I grew up in an old house that was probably built early 1800s, had been in the family like 5 generations. My father was a kind of a history nut, and my brother and my father and myself, we replumbed and rewired the whole place. There's a lot, believe me, a lot of work, a lot of cobwebs, a lot of scrapes from, crawling into spaces to push the wiring. The wiring was all internal in the partition, pulling the old plaster apart and everything to get to some of it and to put insulation in. And it was frustrated my mother, but my father loved doing it. And for the 30 years that odd years that I had lived there, and they had the place, it was in one state of disrepair or another. It's a love to restore an old house.
You know, I look at our historic area, Morrison House, et cetera, and the house they had taken down, and the beams are all in those containers. They came to me about 3 months ago and asked if I would take it and rebuild it in Londonderry. But it's $1 million. They had their estimates from before of how to put that back together again, and I don't think you could use it. You know, it's a very old house that has the characteristics of low ceilings and other things.
Well, I think this conversation has been productive. I think I think the chairman has a course that I would agree with. And let's not beat a dead horse. Let's get it over to the council and see if we can,
Did you want a motion on it?
Agreed. Yeah, I was thinking we could have a motion. So, once again, I'll just restate my recommendation, which is to direct the town manager to work with town council and the town attorney to make necessary changes to the easement to make property commercially viable. Is there any other language anybody thinks should be involved?
No, the only thing I will flag, Mr. Chairman, is I do think that, and Councilor Butler, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there should be, there will need to be additional guidance in terms of, should a distinction be drawn between the exterior and the interior? What to do with the barn? And I don't think tonight is necessarily the right time to have that discussion, but I imagine the council will have some thoughts on that and may refer such questions back to this body, so that information can get worked into what we're looking at doing.
Sure.
it's reasonable.
Yeah, I think there's gonna be a lot of back and forth, to get everything resolved and,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
the one concern I have is listening to Mr. Flyer a little bit. He's got no rent coming in currently from this property. I think the barn that is an immediate danger, okay, when I look at that barn. I didn't walk in as far as Mr. Butler did, because I put a value on my life, okay? I think whatever we do, it has to be sort of a post-haste kind of thing, because commercially viable can't be commercially viable a year from now. It's got to be in a reasonable period of time.
I agree with those comments. I do think that the situation's gotten away from us a little bit with respect to the condition, at least of the barn, but perhaps the rest of the property as well. The one thing I would say is this: I'm used to it because I'm a lawyer by training, but to the extent a court proceeding is required, those things never go quickly. And I just want to be clear, I've referred a couple of times to a court proceeding. This instrument has a mechanism to sort of reopen the agreement. I'm not 100% certain that it's going to require a visit to court. But the situation that we're discussing tonight is a cooperative effort, right? Certainly Mr. Flyer could go in and ask unilaterally for a court to revisit the terms of this agreement. That's not what we're talking about here tonight. We're talking about the town council, if it's comfortable proceeding to reopen this agreement to make it more commercially viable, doing so cooperatively with the current owner, and then, if needed, going to a court asking for approval to do that.
Richard, is that okay with you?
Yes.
I want it, okay.
Yeah, and also if you have ideas, other things. You could have a clubhouse for this organization.
I don't know if I put too many people on the floor. Got enough problem with the Lions Hall.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll make that motion.
Okay,
I'll
so
second it.
motioned, so seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Immediately following this meeting, I will send an email to Mr. Malaguti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Flyer. Okay,
Can you come up to the mic?
David. Mr. Ellis, could you come up to the mic, please?
Yeah, sure, sorry.
That's okay.
So the folks at home can hear you.
Dave Ellis, most of you know me, I'm a resident in town. When this agreement you're gonna work out and figure out what you'd like to do, when will there be an opportunity for public input into that?
So, I hadn't moved on to public input tonight yet, but that was next on the agenda, where you would have had the ability to
We haven't
speak.
got an agreement to give input on yet.
Also, as you stated, I think this is gonna come back from the town council. Because this is going on to town council, I think that may probably be
That
the
would be the
correct venue.
vehicle.
But if they send more things back to us to give them input, you will also have another chance to
Yeah.
speak.
It's just, I would like to have a chance to look it over and make public comment. I'm sure others would.
By all means, and Mr. Chairman, I certainly want to acknowledge Mr. Ellis's comments. Something, that's so significant to the town as this property and the easement that's currently protecting it.
Most likely have a
should-
public hearing.
should have at a minimum a public hearing, the opportunity for the public to look at the document that's under discussion. There is no document, we're not even close to that. But I fully agree that this is not something that should be rushed from vis-a-vis the public participation component of this.
Thank you. Richard, that's some historical research I did on the property.
All right, everybody. So next item